Morning, everyone. Sorry to be distracted. I'm actually not sure if Jordan is going to come. I think he may, but I'm just not 100% sure because we had talked about it being Mother's Day, and I know that some of you have to be attentive to your mothers, uh, for which I totally understand. Um, And the reason I'm doing this on Mother's Day is because I want to put on the video, the material, and you can watch it anytime. So if you have um, if you have your mother to attend to, please attend to her first, and and don't listen to this, and then on another occasion you can come back and watch the video. Okay, so last week we began a an essay from this book. We're working with this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. They were the editors of it. There are many wonderful essays, and we are in volume two of the 5-volume series. And so we will proceed along. And this is a very interesting week because this is the third major section of this essay, which is Roman numeral 3, self and God, and under A, good and evil. So I will begin to read, and I may have to do this solo today, which is okay by me. But please do feel free to make comments in the YouTube chat, which I'm monitoring, and that will push me along a bit. And so, self and God, good and evil. Jung's soul is also the soul of this small, violated girl, an image of his undeveloped feminineness, part of his incapacity. The rubble he rejects as bad and leaves undeveloped in his personal hell. Now, couple things to mention here before I go on. The violated girl is the uh, girl whose body is found along the side of the road in Dr. Jung's active imagination, and he's called upon by his soul to eat the liver of the child, which is liver was considered by many the place of the soul. And but in Jung's vision, it represents Jung's incapacity. He initially thinks that this is too horrible to even contemplate, and then he does eat the liver and realizes that both the kind of ghostly figure that is with him and the child are his soul. Jung learns that at the bottom of our incapacity, evil that stares at you coldly. Um, so all of us have evil within us in the psychological sense. And when you get down to the bottom, it stares at you coldly. We thus blunder into redeeming our image of the distinction of good and evil. The God is not just our highest ideals of good, nor does it only dwell outside us. The goals of the living God are placed inside us, the innermost sight of our psyche, through which we have any picture of the self, God, or others. If we put all our force, energy, into the ideal good God outside us, into the ideal good God outside us, our human self is drained of aliveness and left mired in the bad we tried to expel. God is then only the above and excludes the below. We must take that energy back into ourself and recognize psyche in us as bridge to the God transcending us. This God includes the below and the above. Our former picture of their sharp division dissolves. Good and evil unite in our growing from the below to the above. If we stop growing, they fall apart into hostile vying. But the warmth of life, which contains good and evil, inseparably and indistinguishably, that is the way of life. Yet this is not the goal, but the way and the crossing, beginning the recovery. Okay, so I don't know if any of you want to comment on that. Please do if you can on the chat. But let's make the fundamental point here that we have been making through all the time we've been reading the Red Book, etc., that we all have good and we all have evil within ourselves. And, the church for many years made us believe that we could separate the two and not use their energy. But we can't get away from the evil part of ourselves. And so what we need to do, and this is according, of course, to Jungian theory, we need to integrate the two so that we can learn to live in a world that contains both good and evil. And we can, one hopes, decide for the good. And Dr. Jung felt that these forces are relatively equally balanced, both in ourselves and the world, and that we must, choose. And, most of us, as we're educated by our parents, learn to choose the good, but we cannot walk away from the good. And, walk away from the evil part of ourselves. And boy, do I ever understand that. And the fact that our own personal hell, she talks about our own personal hell. Well, I had a own personal hell because I left my first wife after 17 years, and my daughters were quite young at the time. The youngest was 5. The eldest was 12, but the one who was 10 was particularly wounded, I think, by the fact that I left the family. And I didn't leave the family high and dry as many men do, but I did make about 200 trips over a 15-year period to where my children were living, 400 miles away from Washington, where I was living. And and so I visited them regularly. I spent weekends with them, and I maintained my relationship not only with my children, but with my ex-wife as well. So that now we are at the point where my ex-wife and her husband and me and my new wife, Debbie, can have dinner together, be at family gatherings together. And I still love my first wife, but more like a sister. And it's only on days like today, Mother's Day, that I have to acknowledge that she's the mother of our children. And and I certainly love her for being the mother of our children because we have three beautiful daughters. The eldest is now 50, and we have um, 10 beautiful grandchildren. So all of those things are blessings. And, it's a hard thing to accomplish to stay in a relationship with someone who doesn't get along with you well anymore. And but sometimes it's necessary to come apart because um, things don't go well sometimes if you don't. And, and I wasn't getting what I needed in my soul from the first relationship. And so now my new wife and I, Debbie and I have been together now for, it'll be 40 years in January. And so, and we, as I say, we get along with my ex-wife and her husband, and very well with our children, who we have communicated with this very morning, it being Mother's Day, and my biological children regarding Debbie as a stepmother, but nonetheless a motherly figure in their lives who takes care of them and their children very well, just as a grandmother would do. And so that's, as I look at it and think about it, it's a hard thing to accomplish, but we've done it, and um, I I feel whole about it now. It would have been not good if we had stayed together previously. Um, so that's the way it is. We have to carry that. Uh, I've never regretted my decision, and yet, I still do love my ex-wife also, but more as a sister. Um, so next we're going to go to the God image. If you have any comments on what I've said or anything else, you can feel free to put them in the YouTube chat, and we'll chat some more. Okay, the new image of God. I'm sorry. This is the God image now. Jung focuses on the distinction between God and God image. Facing the temptation to the good, Jung sees we cannot exclude the bad, and that changes our image of God. If it is true that soul is not a material container for us, but rather that other standpoint within us, for the God is always where you are not. For Jung, that other location challenges his ambitious vanity and undeveloped feminine modality, which for him is related to feeling. The point is that the Godhead is also the other within us. In the form of God image, our soul, through our psyche, creates, and not some idealized, distant deity unconnected to our all too human selves. We do not create or find God, but deal always with our images of God, who also exist external to ourselves. Okay, so when Jung is talking about the God image, um, he's talking about what God is to each one of us individually. And that can be very different across societies, across religions, etc. We all think of God differently. But um, And God with a capital G is actually something else. It is the ineffable, the something beyond all understanding. And um, but our God image and God as He exists within all of us, um, basically guides us, okay, and guides us into what we are to do with life. And so um, when we um, when we talk about the unconscious and getting in communication with the unconscious, we are talking about getting in communication with your particular God image and understanding how um, that God image interacts with us. And by image, we have to understand it as it can be anything. For example, if I think of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, now you weren't thinking about that a moment ago, but now that I've mentioned it, you are. And all of us know passages out of that symphony. Bum, 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 bum. And I'm sorry, I can't carry a tune, but I give you the right idea of it. And so um, as I think of it, I think of an experience hearing the NHK orchestra in Ueno, Tokyo, um, play it and being in attendance at that concert. And it was very meaningful to me then, and it still is. And so when I think of that image, I do think of it as an image of God in effect. And I think of it in its wholeness. I think of uh, the passage, certain passages of the symphony. I think of uh, the environment I was in the first time I heard it in that symphony hall in Tokyo, Japan, and um, and I think of it the way it has always been in my heart, and so that is. I consider it as God speaking to me, not Beethoven speaking to me, although that it is that also. Beethoven's God image was conveyed to me through that symphony, among other works of Beethoven. Um, so all of that is tied up together and bound together. Uh, Richard says, I'm thinking it's a sausage fest today because of Mother's Day that may be lacking the better half of mankind. We may be lacking the better half of mankind. Well, that may be true. Who knows? But I'm hopeful that if ladies are having breakfast in bed, then they will have a chance to watch this at a later time. Speaking of breakfast in bed, I always think about the what my mother had to do to have her children uh, feed her bed breakfast in bed and thereby feel good about themselves for honoring their mother. But there were times in the Navy when my father was far away and we were little children. And so she wanted breakfast in bed on Mother's Day and wanted that to be a tradition. So she would get up and cook it and then get back into bed and allow her uh, toddlers at the time to deliver it to her at bedside. I don't think we ever spilled it onto the bed cover, but mother's work is never done, so they say. And I just think of what it cost my mother to have us serve her breakfast in bed, and honor her with that memory. Okay, so Dr. Ulanov continues. The new image of God manifests as the supreme meaning, the bridge to what is to come. That is the God yet to come. It is not the coming God himself, but his image which appears in the supreme meaning. God is an image, and those who worship him must worship him in the images of the supreme meaning. This meaning includes images of the below too. This meaning includes images of the below too, nonsense, absurdity, ugliness, ambiguity, as well as images of the beautiful, good, and true. We cannot put into God just the good and leave out the bad, lest we drain away energies of our aliveness and pile the bad onto our neighbor. God wants to sit at the table with me, work with me, be ever present. Jung objects, quote, the divine appears to me as irrational craziness, unquote, stealing into reasonable, meaningful human activity. This is the real living God. Or actually, the divine, I'm going to quote Jung again here. The divine appears to me as irrational craziness stealing into reasonable, meaningful human activity, unquote. This is the real living God. Jung's ingesting of the murdered girl's liver, surely an image of below, destroys his image of God as idealized good, but leads to putting the glowing coals of God into the self. A God he cannot escape from, but will face in the humdrum of daily life. In taking back into the sight of innermost our image of God, we return all the force of the human psyche, breaking down our previous God image, domesticated in the Christianity of the spirit of the times. We confront the temptation to the good in order to evade the divine nearness of the transcendent within our very body's self by idealizing the good in a far distant God outside us. But Jung sees that he cannot by himself destroy his formation image of the highest God to which we are enthralled. Clinically, we see God images landing on whatever we call the goods: money, power, substances that call us into drugs, drink, certain foods, what we see as our highest ideals of knowledge, art, science, and love, whatever acts like a good in our personality around which we revolve as the ultimate value for positive and negative effects. I understand this as a foundational image whose destruction would make us feel we will lose our mind because become disoriented. That madness will overtake us. We cannot will to destroy our God image of the highest good by ourselves, but only in shocking dependence on evil to do it for and with us. God says, I'm sorry, it's a Freudian slip. Jung says, quote, you cannot dissolve good with good. You can dissolve good only with evil. That dissolution leaves us with what to do in the face of evil. Our personal problem with the bad opens to the human problem of how destructiveness finds a place in living. Jung reaches his amazing response. God, good and evil unite only in growth through below to above. When growth stops, they fall apart into violent rivalry. We too must develop solutions to the places of devastation in existence. Okay, I'll stop there for a minute and let's see if you have comments. Richard says a painting by Rembrandt titled An Old Jewish Man is how I picture God to look in his human form of spirit and flesh. And Sheree says, sorry I'm late. I was listening to Ron Carter, the Jazz Composers Orchestra, 1968, with Carly Bley, pianist. Happy Mother's Day to everyone. Okay. Um, so the point is that we have to actively be bringing the two sides together. And this was well known by the ancients. I can't put my hand on it at the moment, but there are several famous sculptures of a baby holding two snakes. And the snakes are both you know, writhing in the baby's hands. And that's what we have to recognize is that this is us. And if you think of the caduceus, which is the symbol of medicine, you see on one side, on both sides are snakes, and one represents healing power and one represents poison. And it is true that in order to save us, sometimes doctors have to poison us. Good example of that is chemotherapy, where many of us have had friends who've gone through chemotherapy, and sort of the least of the results of that is that they lose their hair. But what's going on is actually that the doctors are trying to poison the tumor, um, or the cancerous cells, so that we can produce new healthy cells and go on living. Um, and hello, Grace Ann. I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge you earlier, and thank you to Richard for reminding me to do so. Um, Jung says you cannot dissolve good with good. You can only dissolve good with the evil, with evil. That dissolution leaves us with what to do in the face of evil. Our personal problem with the bad opens to the human problem of how destructiveness finds a place in living. Jung reaches his amazing response. Good and evil unite only in growth from below to above. When growth stops, they fall apart into violent rivalry. We too must develop solutions to the place of devastation in existence. And boy, oh boy, do we ever have this coming back to us in spades today. Um, with several wars and so on that all represent this. This to me is, not only prophetic, but it surely is um, a truth par excellence that if we meditate on it and think about what it means to us as individuals, we oh goodness, it just overwhelms us, and so we have to learn how to hold these two snakes in our hands and keep them from biting us, because we don't necessarily know which snake is the carries the medicine and which carries the poison. And also, we don't know whether the poison may, in fact, be used to um, help us. We just don't know sometimes. Okay, so others and self. The link between individual and collective life is unavoidable. I'm sorry. The link between individual and collective life is unavoidable. Working on our personal individual problem with what to do with the bad turns out to be our contribution to the impersonal collective problem with evil. No matter how tiny our work on the bad, it is our contribution to the huge human problem to find the place for annihilation in aliveness. We are linked to each other, and the small um, inextricably um, links to the large. Evil dissolves the formation of the highest God. What we blunder to redeem, however faultily, contributes to the shared human task of seeing the distinction between the inner penetration of our personal, individual, and shared collective tasks to of facing temptations of the good and of evil. I think I better read that last bit. Is it all one sentence? I guess it is. It's a complicated sentence. And it's hypnotizing me. And hello, Kathy. Good to see you. It's good to see people show up on the YouTube chat because it helps me stay awake. Okay, so let me read this again. We are linked to each other, and the small inextricably links to the large. Evil dissolves the formation of the highest God. What we blunder to redeem, however faultily, contributes to the shared human task of seeing the distinction between and the interpenetration of our personal, individual, and shared collective tasks, facing the temptations of good and of evil. Okay. So that's our job. We have to first recognize that we have um, evil within us and that we could commit some evil. And then we have to reconcile that with ourself, because within that reconciliation is the energy to live, to do everything that we do in life. We're going to get through the rest of this essay today. I'm going to keep reading. And Cherie says, I watched the May 9th Victory Day in Russia and Ray McGovern's speech to students, who Oliver Stone, who has been with him. Yeah, I'm not quite following the connection there, Cherie, but anyway, Jung, in his first version of Psychology of the Unconscious, very often said these words: in times of peace, prepare for war. And um, I think the difference between what the Russians have traditionally done and what we have traditionally done is that in the United States, um, we do not aggrandize the military. Okay, we um, we respect the military in many ways, but people who artificially try to make it better all when they say, "Oh, thank you for your service." Um, I was thanked when I came back from Vietnam. I was thanked. I was thanked by my family, and I was thanked by my government in the form of 5 years of graduate school, law school, and business school, paid for by the GI Bill. I consider that a big thank you. Um, and I didn't do it because everybody in my that I should ever meet think it's wonderful that I served in the U.S. military. I don't think that at all. I think that that's the job, and I just there are plenty of other people who deserve to be thanked, and if we had to thank everybody the way we obsequiously thank our troops, um, we'd spend half a day every day just thanking people because we have first responders, both fire and ambulance, and we have police forces, and you name it, um, and people who work very long hours to keep us healthy and that sort of thing. And so, um, I personally just feel it's odd to be thanked all the time. And every time it happens, and it happens quite frequently, um, I I just feel embarrassed. And because because I don't feel the need to be thanked. I mean, I came back from Vietnam 55 years ago, believe it or not, 55 years ago. Um, and so when I came out of Vietnam and was on the 707 coming out of Vietnam, um, the sun was rising in the east. And I remember what a bright, beautiful day it was. And, but in no way was I looking for my fellow countrymen, nor was I expecting my fellow countrymen to thank me. And actually, my father-in-law of the time uh, took a door and turned it on its side and wrote on it in very big letters, "Welcome home, Skip," and put it over the door of his garage. And I thought that was fine. I appreciated it very much. And but then, beyond a week or something like that, I didn't feel it was necessary to have that up on the garage anymore. And my father-in-law finally took it down. Um, and we went on celebrating life by going to law school and preparing to have our three daughters, and and having our three daughters and the many joys that brought us. um, Incredible, the joys that can come to one when you come out of that kind of an environment. But um, to be 55 years later, still being thanked, I mean, that's just over the top. And I just, at some level, it's insincere, I feel. And it's just, it's like saying God bless you or something when someone sneezes. Anyway, okay. Um, let's see. Sheree says, "Poet of Russian Sorrow" by Nekrasov Ray. spoke in Russian. I understand the horror of war. I understand the horror of war. With every new victim of battle, I do not feel sorry for my friend. I do not. Yeah. Um, any death is horrible. Okay. And um, my understanding is that about half of the deaths in Vietnam were actually um, accidents. They weren't death in the face of the enemy, but everybody got treated as if it was, because they wanted people to understand that their the magnitude of what that gift of service was. Fair enough. I mean, I think that that's fine because you do make a sacrifice when you serve in the military. But at the same time, we have to say thank you and let's get on with life now. We have a new life. It's not a life of war for us, not yet anyway. Uh, I'm afraid it might be sometime soon. Sherry went on, she said, I do not feel sorrow for my hero. Alas, the wife will be consoled and the friend will forget the best friend. And somewhere from the soul, she will remember the coffin among the faces of our village. Um, yeah, I mean, when my best friend, my older brother, Marine, I call him my older brother. He's not my blood brother, but when my older brother, Bob Christian, was killed in Vietnam, I didn't have time to mourn it. I was busy getting ready to go to Vietnam myself, and I took it in as as a fact, but I didn't adequately mourn it until many years later. It happened in 1969, and it wasn't until 2016 that I realized that I hadn't mourned it properly. And it was in 1995 that I had seen the Pollock in the Boston Museum of Art. Uh, and at some visceral level, it reminded me of being in the jungle of Vietnam. And I began to weep uncontrollably, but I didn't know why until one of my friends who did serve um, said that it must be connected to my Vietnam service, which it surely was. And then I realized that it was my mourning. But we have to go on with life. And so, anyway, Richard says there's an Orthodox Christian convent in Russia called St. Elizabeth's Monastery. And their piousness is unbelievable and beautiful. It's like they find their freedom in God. And absolutely, I mean, I'm sure that that is so. And you know, these institutions of monasteries and convents, served an important purpose in society many years ago. I presume that they did serve as refuges for for people who didn't want to face the difficulties of life one way or another, or they had to recover from some of the difficulties of life, Um, and so they went to the convent for protection. Um, let's see. Cherie says, with all the vulgarity and prose, okay, among the faces of our villages and with all the vulgarity and prose, she will remember the coffin. So the reason I started to talk about Bob Christian's death is that his sister, 40 years later, told me that uh, all she could think of was the empty grave um, that her brother was put into, and the fact that it had been a closed coffin. And I know why it was a closed coffin. And um, I remember Bob as the beautiful man that he was, and not as a cadaver, I guess. How do you say it? Um, so anyway, Sheree, please save the thank yous for my service. I'm not fishing for thank yous for my service, honestly. Okay, I'm going to go on. All right, God and self. The Red Book opens and closes with direct references to God and the relation of God and self. At the book's beginning, uh, Christ is the one whom Scripture describes. Quote, he is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, unquote. Quote, unto us a child is born, called Wonderful, Counselor, unquote. Quote, the Word was made flesh, unquote. At the book's end in the garden, Christ is the shade who brings the beauty of suffering, unquote, which I understand as the possibility that suffering, bad as it is because related to the worm, evil, may include creative response, unquote. Jung lost his soul connection to the God image prevalent in the spirit of the times. Searching for his soul, he blundered into God images different from his connection, from his conscious God, but that were real, which he knew because of the unshakableness of the experiences. Dread grips him because images of what is to come differ radically from what is familiar. Hap designates God's other pole of the night, the flesh and blood spirit of bodily juices, sperm, entrails, joints, eyes, ears, feet, sputum, excrement. Jung fights with his soul, who, though a steady if strenuous guide, also aims to run off to heaven for her own salvation with the treasure of human love. No, Jung says, human love is his and humanity's lifeblood, and she should work for the good of humanity here. She yields. Differentiation initiates between the need of the dead and the living, between precious ego life versus life in the hereafter. Philemon speaks of the dead, and to Jung about another God image, Abraxas as creative force, formless and forming, the stream, the stream of life, creative drive, form and formation, and the sucking gorge of emptiness, and counsels we are to live our life against the force of Abraxas, for our individuation counters Abraxas's blasting power. the dead crowd in the dead crowd in because of their unlived life pressures. They did not individuate, but childishly cast the burden of their redemption onto Christ, whose command to love each other they disobeyed and killed instead. They demand the animal in themselves. They failed to atone for the ox with the velvet eyes, or to do penance for the sacred ore that they dug up from the belly of the earth. In contrast, Philemon tells Jung, we must not naively put our small self into the bigness of God, since the God is an unfathomable, powerful movement that sweeps away the self into the boundless, into dissolution. Jung fears this threat could plunge him into psychosis. A living God afflicts our reason like a sickness. He fills the soul with an intoxication, with reeling chaos. How many will how many will the God break? Yet Jung survives the influx of the God by brute strength and with a dawning uneasy insight that the small, narrow, and banal is not nonsense, but one of the essences of the Godhead, that of the Godhead that lives with his everyday in ordinary ego life in the world. So we must, Jung sees, establish ourself, pull ourself to our side from God, wrestle with the God for the self, free the self from God, from the God, so we can live. Yet later, Philemon says we should live in the God, not the God live in us. Jung perceives, quote, not the self is God, although we reach God through the self. The God is behind the self, above the self, and the self itself, uh, when he appears, our heaviest wound. Having gained a sense of self, we then can elect to give it or not to God. I believe we have the choice. I believe we have the choice. I prefer the living wonders of the God. Since I want to live, since I want to live, my life wants itself whole. But the way that happens is to live your very own life to the full. Quote, there is only one way, and that is your way, unquote. Okay. Other comments here? Yeah. As Shuri points out, um, I have no need to believe I know. And uh, Aristotle speaks of panentheism. Uh, I think Richard says we should suffer for those who don't know God. We should all be little Jesuses and offer up the suffering to God as a penance for the ignorance of others. Well, I I think that's a bit patriarchal, Richard, in the sense that it's not for us. Um, it's not for us to heal the sins of the world. It's for us to live our own lives as best we can, And to the extent that we can offer others a different way of thinking about God and about who we are, um, I think we've done a service there, it seems to me. Now, I want to, what comes to mind as I'm talking here is Mary Mary Oliver's poem, uh, "The Wild Geese" by, uh, well, maybe it's by Wendell Berry. Uh, I thought it was by Mary Oliver. I know I heard it spoken by, no, it is the Mary Oliver's poem here. Let me, I just want to read it to you so that you are thinking about something that I was thinking about. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. It's again, The Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Just find that extremely moving personally, and I always have since I first read it. And let's see. So Sri says, numinous, it seems uh, something divinity and holy aesthetic sense. God manifests in hour of need, from the Patmos poem. Yeah, there is that too. That's the Catholic belief system, says Richard. I unite my suffering with Christ on the cross to make up with what is lacking in Christ's afflictions for the sake of his church, from Paul's epistle. Well, okay. So it's a beautiful poem. Um, but what was mentioned here too was Patmos, which is another poem that Dr. Jung liked very much, and it's by Holderlin. Um, and the reason the reason it's significant, very significant, um, is that John of Patmos was the writer of Revelation. Okay. And he wrote it about 400 years AD, apparently. Uh, so, anyway, let's read this for a moment as well. Well, it's a very long poem, but I'll start you off. It's Patmos by uh, Holderlin, Friedrich Holderlin. Um, the God is near and hard to grasp, but where there is danger, a rescuing element grows as well. Eagles live in the darkness, and the sons of the Alps cross over the abyss without fear on lightly built bridges. Therefore, since the summits of time are heaped about, and dear friends live near, growing weak on the separate mountains, they give us calm waters, give us wings and loyal minds to cross over and return. Thus I spoke when faster than I could imagine a spirit led me forth from my own home to a place I thought I'd never go. The shaded forests and yearning brooks of my native country were glowing in the twilight. I couldn't recognize the lands I passed through, but then suddenly, in fresh splendor, mysterious in the golden haze, quickly emerging in the steps of the sun, fragrant with 1,000 peaks, Asia rose before me. Okay, so anyway, I'm not going to read that whole poem, but um, it does bring to mind something that I did want to speak about today. So I'm going to tell you about it now. And Cherie says, Pilar, the Navy hymn, if I am feeling down, very dark in the chapel on the right side looking up. Yeah. Uh, yeah, Cherie, you've listened to me, I guess. uh, yeah, the Navy hymn for me has been a bulwark of my life since I was 10 years old. Since I first consciously heard it, I must have heard it even before that age, but at 10, I lived in Norfolk, Virginia, and my family would go to chapel at the Navy Chapel on Naval Air Station, Norfolk. And at that time, that air station was the busiest airport in the world. And what was happening was that sub chasers, airplanes that were looking for submarines, would go out on 12-hour missions and trying to find submarines. And um, while I was that age, one or two of them didn't come back. Um, and so the Navy hymn has always been a part of my life. And um, it was there that I heard it for the first time. It's for others, it's not called the Navy hymn, it's called Eternal Father. And um, it was originally called Melita, and Melita was the ancient name for Malta. And the reason was that St. Paul was once shipwrecked on Malta. And so the words for the Navy hymn and Eternal Father originally came from this poem called Melita, meaning Malta. Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm doth bind the restless wave, who bids the mighty ocean deep its own appointed limits keep. O hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea. And it's a hymn that can apply to all of us because we're all in peril on the sea of space, the great vastness of space, and so on. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to mention this book. This is a play by Murray Stein and Henry Abramovich, who wrote the play that I um, actually performed as Carl Jung in 2022, called The Analyst and the Rabbi. And that play was about uh, a post-war reconciliation between one of the leading rabbis of his time, um, and Rabbi Beck, and Dr. Jung. And it occurred at the Savoy Hotel in Zurich. And by interesting coincidence, there are, I would call it synchronicity. I was born actually the day before this meeting actually took place on October 6th, 1946. I was born on the 5th. But anyway, the following uh, in that play, the two men are reconciled, and 1 year later, in 1947, they met again. This time at Eranos, which was an annual conference that was held by a woman named uh, Kapteyn, Olga Kapteyn. And let's see, I guess I better get out of my get out of my cloaking so that you can see this cover. So this is the cover of the book, Eranos, by a play by Murray Stein and Henry Abramovich. Henry Abramovich is a Jungian analyst living in Jerusalem, and I'm fortunate to um, have him among my friends as well as Murray. And so our small ensemble of non-Jungian analysts performed that play in Helena, Montana in um, on June 12th, 2022. And you can find that performance. It's a 1 hour play, so you can find the entire thing here on this YouTube channel. And so anyway, but the point of Eranos is about the place, and the fact that Olga Kapteyn um, organized this event between some of the world's great thinkers of the mid 20th century every year from about 1929 to into current current time. I think it's still being uh, done, but let's see. What the heck is it? Okay. So there's also a stone at Aranos, and the stone says Genio Loci Ignoto, which translates to unknown genius of the place. And so the point that Paul Brutsch um, was talking about the symbolic significance of the stone of Aranos by Paul Brutsch, and he was talking about the importance of the stone which appears there. And it carries those three words, the unknown genius of the place. And in his essay, which is carried in this book, and you can get this play very inexpensively by going to Chiron Publications. So I'm not going to read it to you in detail, but I'll put the name of the publisher here um, so that you can see it. And the play is called Eranos. And the point is that it became a kind of sacred place for Jungians because Jung would come every year and he would hold forth, but so did many others. And Joseph Campbell, for example, spent a great deal of time editing the papers from Eranos in English so that all of us can see them. And so there's actually 6 volumes of some of the most important papers from Eranos. Um, and I attempted to go to Eranos. I wanted to go in 2020, but that was the year we had COVID. And unfortunately, Thomas Arst, who invited me um, on that occasion, um, died a few weeks before because of COVID. He died on Easter Sunday, 2020. And it's a great loss to me. He had become a friend of mine and a guiding light as well. But anyway, the book is important, and the significance of it is the the genius of the place that all these people came together, and because of their connection, um, something really important came out of it. Now, I would say, and I realized as I was reading this that, for Jungians, yes, this is an important place. And indeed, I wouldn't mind going there just for a visit. And I'm sure I'll be quite moved by being there. But, um, you know, a sacred place can be anywhere. And really, what they're talking about is communication um, and community. And we do that every week on this YouTube channel. I wrote to Tim Holmes yesterday, and I pointed out that we have uh, sacred places now among a group of uh, Jungian interested artists um, that was created by the fact that we had our confluences in Helena, Montana, and in Mount Madonna, and we had an earlier get together of the 7 of us that sponsored the confluence at the home of Colleen Kibert. And because of those events, those were quite sacred too to me, and each one is sacred. But I just want to observe that electronic media doesn't quite get it. It doesn't quite create the atmosphere that you need to have for such a communion among people. You need to physically be present. And while we try to express and share these events with you online and anywhere in the world, um, you can create your own. Okay, and we favor anybody having a confluence and getting people together just to talk about whatever topic they like. And for us, we see the value of the arts as a way to help us pass through a very difficult time in the history of our country. And so the important thing is to maintain your communion with others, wherever that may be, whether it's in church and in coffee clutches at Dunkin' Donuts or what have you. Each of those places becomes sacred when more than one person is present. And even when one person is present, if there are sacred places in your life, as there are for me, I don't need anybody else present because uh, the divine nature of these places carries over for many years and for probably for your whole lifetime. And so while I think Uranus, the play, is important, I hope you'll see it. I don't think it's only that place. I mean, it's only that place for that place and time. And sadly, we can't get that group of people together any longer. But we can meet wherever we are in the world. And I think even in the Bible, uh, Christ said, whenever you get together, um, you can break bread and have wine and think of me. And that was think of Christ, not to me personally. Uh, but anyway, I need to take a short bio break. I will be back in a couple of minutes. I apologize for my human weaknesses, but I will be right back. Okay, I've returned. We can finish off this essay. Speaking of the Naval Academy, as our current administration turns turns our country into his own version of hell. Um, Yesterday, it was announced that I can no longer take foreign visitors onto the Naval Academy grounds, something that I've been doing um, for 35 years, living here in Annapolis, and so I'm now limited to only taking American citizens onto the grounds. I'm very happy that I took my Malaysian friend um, there on Easter Sunday, most recent Easter Sunday. Um, let's see. See. Yeah. Unfortunately, life has moved on, and the people who um, have learned from Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers and others are now um, in our dotage, and it's going to be up to uh, it's going to be up to the rest of you and to movies, as you're correctly saying here, um, to figure out what to do, what's right. Um, Jay Tanner says here, I had a college professor who taught us that the first Star Wars movie is the only initiation some people get. And that could also be said about The Godfather or, many other movies of this type. And, um, The Godfather is another type of initiation movie. And fortunately, we have a president who thinks in those terms today. Um, and so we'll see. I think the American people will rise up in righteous anger over this the next time we have an opportunity to elect someone, but that may be difficult, and we don't know how long. And I just quote the character that Ben Kingsley played in the Gandhi movie, who said, there have been tyrants, and for a time they seem very strong, but in the end, they always fail. Think of it, always. And so, we see the limitations of our president's proclivities and his henchmen's proclivities to do things um, unraveling before our very eyes. So I think that the American people will change things back to the way, or not the way they were, but the way they should have, should be as uh, the America of going forward. And I think in fairness, I think that there were some um, mistakes made by forcing through DEI. I think that it was the right thing to do for a time, and yet it um, maybe has outlived its time and purpose, and um, it's very hard um, to judge when the appropriate time is. But, from my point of view, anybody who has become a naturalized American, plus all Native Americans, um, and by that I mean both native and native, and we're all Americans, and I see my fellow Americans as Americans. I've served with many of them, and um, I'm confident in the American zeitgeist, I guess is what I would say. All right, so let's read the last section of Anne's book, or her essay. So I'm reading from Anne Belford Ulanov's essay entitled Blundering into the Work of Redemption. And this is the fourth section entitled Devotion. Jung, who wrestles his undeveloped feeling into living, fills with ardor, not to another person, but to love itself, not to fame and ambition, but to living his own path, tending his garden humbly. From his experience of giving birth, Jung reaches voluntary devotion, shedding, commingling of his ambition for personal fame with love, thus redeeming his feeling function. Although this dismembering is painful, it yields Jung's decision for what is required of me, is required. It yields Jung's decision for what, quote, is required of me. I accepted all the joy and every torment of my nature and remained true to my love, to suffer what comes to everyone in their own way. And I stood alone and was afraid, unquote. In full-hearted allegiance to the soul that speaks through his psyche, he later confides that our libido, which he calls serpent energy in the Red Book, is the divine pneuma in us, and that he looked for a sign that the spirit of the depths in me was at the same time the ruler of the depths of world affairs. Think of Jung's sustained feeling as devotion, 16 years carefully painting his pivotal experiences to show the mysteries that lived him. For example, she refers to a lot of different images in the Red Book. This private endeavor marks what is to come, only published decades after its creation. Living our life to the full includes our unlived life. Live what you have never yet lived. The life I could still live, I should live, and the thoughts that I should still think, I should think, unquote. This way feeds community and does not sap it by imitating our neighbor and neglecting our own becoming, nor foisting on others what we want them to be instead of greeting them their otherness. Quote, may each one seek out his own way. The way leads to mutual love and community, unquote. Then, quote, if we fulfill the need of the self, through this we become aware of the needs of the communal and can fulfill them, unquote. But, quote, if you give up yourself, you live it in others. Thereby you become selfish to others, infect others. To live oneself means to become one's own task, a long suffering, since you must become your own creator, unquote. Jung's way is wrestling with self and God, and through that, serving others. To Jung's astonishment, his way means to become Christ, not just to follow Christ, but to engage temptation of the good, not just of evil as did Christ, to suffer torture of the spirit by the flesh, not just torture of the flesh by the spirit as did Christ. Jung sees he must suffer his own mystery play, not imitate others, nor should we. You have your own. Utterly poor, miserable, unknowingly humiliated, go through your gate. Jung does not identify with God, but remains himself. You do not become God, but God becomes human as a child. I become Christ in the mysterium. I was made into Christ, and yet am completely myself that I still doubt. In saying to follow Christ is to be Christ means that Jung and we pursue our unique way as Christ did his, and accept the suffering that comes with doing so, with good and evil, with self and other, with personal and collective, with images of God. It demands everything, and Jung accepts even enlarging his gender in giving birth to this new sense of God, redeeming the feminine without which he could not engage his Red Book venture and come through it. Living our unique way with all it demands means accepting death into life. By becoming as if a dead man, sacrificing striving, letting go of what had been his ruling aims and modes of being, knowing about instead of participating in, certainly over ambiguity. Jung accepts that in the depths, quote, to be that which you are is an endlessly slow growth, unquote, with knowledge from the heart, which is in no book, not in any teacher, but grows out of you like the green seed from the dark earth, unquote. Drawing darkness of death from the beyond into everyday empties the beyond, because we live all we can here. Death is a booster shot to live right now, reminding us that we are not forever. If I accept death, my tree greens. Limitation enables you to fulfill your being. Therefore, the demands of the dead disappeared as they were satisfied. The dead also represent the wisdom of the ages, not just personal unlived life, but by accepting limits of finitude, we can draw upon the sages of the past for the life to be lived now. United with the serpent quells the devil's influence that invades through one's own serpenthood, which one commonly assigns to the devil instead of oneself. I took part of the humiliation and subjugation upon myself and gained some stability that could withstand the fluctuations of the personal. Therefore, the immortal in me was saved. Jung arrives at his personal God image and says this is possible for everyone. It is thus that we are host for the gods. Our God image, smothered by our soul, forms our personal answer to Abraxas. The effectual itself that produces truth and lying, good and evil, light and darkness, life and death in the same word and act. Abraxas is terrible. Our differentiated individuation process to find and create our God image is the gateway to the God and our response to Abraxas. The blind creative drive becomes transformed through individuation, and out of this process, which is like a pregnancy, arises a divine child, a reborn God, no more dispersed, but being one and this individual, and at the same time, all individuals, born in many individuals, but they don't know it. A spirit in many people, the same everywhere. By living our life to the full, we find our particular image of the divine child of our souls, and it throws a bridge across death. Philemon advises, this one God is the kind, the loving, the leading, the healing. To him you should pray. You are one with him. He is near you, nearer than your own soul. I understand this to mean the more devoted we are to this healing God image, the more we participate in the whole, which wants our contribution, the more blasted by the force of being, Abraxas. Devotion to our ownmost way enriches the wholeness of the world. Philemon describes the celestial mother, the final intimation of the feminine in the book, as spirituality conceives and embraces it is womanlike. Jung may come under her aegis when he completes his separation from commingling with that arises through unlived love, where he still bonds with men and things. Jung submits to shredding motives competing with his voluntary devotion by remaining true to love and willingly accepting all the pain and suffering. Only thus do I arrive at my truest and innermost self. By way of our blundering, quote, the time has come when each must do his own work of redemption. Quote. Last quote comes from volume 15, paragraph 356 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. Okay, so that there I have completed Anne's essay in Belford, Ulanov's wonderful essay. And next week we will read Jung, the Nothing and the All by John Darrelly. John Darrelly was a Catholic priest and I believe a Jungian analyst, as I recall. And so we'll look forward to doing that. And for your information, in the advanced reading group, we are dealing with at the moment we're taking a little bit of a breather and talking about some of the chapters in Colleen Keyber's book Art and Spirit, but shortly within the next month we will be beginning the 7 Sermons to the Dead scrutinies, which is the last part of the Red Book. And that will complete our Red Book work. And now I'll go back and look at what you've said on YouTube. Archiplanos says, in truth, there was only one Christian and he died on the cross. Yeah, something like that. Aristotle in a bottle refers to a quote by Arundhati Roy, things that cannot and cannot be said, the dismantling of the world as we knew it. Well, let's put it this way. The world has always been dismantling, and it is always being put back together, and sometimes more so than others. Um, and so that's the job. That's the job of us as human beings, to find our place in the world and what we can do uh, to bring it back together and create commonality in the world. Um, and that's for each of us, it's an individual task. You have to examine thyself, as it is said. Um, instead of the bottle says, it reminds me uh, of Jim Krishnamurti's teachings, and I concur entirely. He says, but I have to check in depth. My immigrant Indian gas station friends here, where I live, and friends for many years knew. Uh, so Krishnamurti, I think Krishnamurti was also a wonderful man. He um, recognized that people were trying to build a cult around him. I think that I think that uh, he lived a humble life. Annie Besant of the Theosophists, who was living in what's now Chennai, used to be called Madras in India around the turn of the last century, the 19th and 20th century, um, found Krishnamurti and his brother on the beach in Madras, and she saw a huge aura around this boy, who I think was about 10 when she took him in. And she cultivated him to be the new Christ, to be the new Savior. And she sent him to Cambridge for education. He became a very knowledgeable man. And on his 33rd birthday, there was a meeting of theosophists in Holland, that where Krishnamurti was supposed to be anointed as the new Messiah. And and he got up on that day to give his speech, and he said, I'm nobody's Messiah. I don't want any followers. Um, you know, it ain't me, babe. And as a result of his doing that, he couldn't escape it and spent the rest of his life as a teacher, um, and not taking on an aura of the Messiah, but taking on the role as a teacher, as a humble teacher, a very wise one at that. He came and spent World War II in the United States, and ultimately um, the place Ojai in California became his base. Uh, that's OJAI, Ojai, California. And there are Krishnamurti centers all over the world now. Um, and thanks to the thinking of this man. Uh, Sure, he says, I have all Krishnamurti's books and lectures, Annie Besant, Charles Ledbetter, and Krishnamurti couldn't have been betrayed. He lived with no self, so nothing could hurt him or betray him or else. And sure, he says he understood, yet was angry by two. What's that sentence um, from Cherie? But anyway, there have been many teachers in the world, and um, there's a famous joke that passes around in Tibetan Buddhism, uh, where, where Christ and the Buddha are at a conference, and they're up on the dais, and uh, at the end of their talks, one of the people in the audience gets up and asks this question. Um, your points of view sound so similar. What keeps you apart? And the answer is our fans. So it's a good teaching because it leads us to understand that, if you create a cult of personality, um, then it becomes a we they thing instead of a communion of commonality. Aristotle in a Bottle recommends the ending of the time, a dialogue between J. Krishnamurti and David Bohm. Uh, so Three asks, who is with Krishnamurti at the moment of death? Uh, well, I have no, um, I have no idea who was with the physical body of Krishnamurti, but I it's my position and my position only that he is not dead. He's with us here today, and you can say whatever you want, but he's um, just because we don't have him physically here doesn't mean that he's not here. And and I'm reminded of Andy Warhol's comment: if you want to be immortal, create something that will live longer than you do. and uh, and so yes, I agree with Shuri. There is no death. Uh, so one thing that has been very meaningful to my family um, by synchronicity, because uh, of the impending death of one of my uh, wife's cousins, whose name happens to be Peter. And so I'll just read the paragraph that's significant to us. And this is from the essay in this book by Paul Britcha. And the title of this part of the essay is "The Stone as a Visible Sign of an Effective Newman." In all cultures, stones have always had the purpose of representing something eternal and immutable. Hence, the custom of erecting a stone monument to famous people and great events. the stone that Jacob set in place at Bethel in the Old Testament, where he had his famous dream, as well as the stones that were placed on the graves of saints and heroes in the past, show the tendency to symbolism and eternal numinous experience with a stone. This is why in many religions, the image of God or the place of his earthly worship was marked by a stone. It is well known that the largest sanctuary in Islam is a black stone in Mecca, the Kaaba. In the symbolism of the church, Christ was also regarded as a stone that was rejected by the builders, and the name Peter, which Jesus gave to his disciple with his blessing, means stone. So when I read that, it gave new meaning to the old Christian saying, on this stone I build my church, because I did not realize that the name Peter means stone. You know, Aristotle says, I don't know who was with him, but I have seen his last lecture one day before his death. And so, anyway, reading this passage made me understand the significance of putting a stone on a grave. And there's a scene in Schindler's List where people who were descendants of people who were saved by Schindler stepped up to his grave and put a stone on his grave. And, obviously, a selfless act like Mr. Schindler committed is numinous and obviously saved lots of people and their project. Okay, so I'm going to move on here because I have other duties to perform today, but next week we'll be reading John Dorley's essay, Jung, the Nothing and the All. So peace be with you, and please make sure you honor your mother on this day and every day for that matter. Cherie says, I love Pope Francis and John Paul II, Bishop Fulton. Bishop Fulton. I was there in New York City and saw the parade. I choose Father Berrigan. Yeah, amen. And just in case, a stone also marks the end of the earthly empires and the beginning of God's reign, according to the book of Daniel. Okay, peace, everyone. Have a good